I have many stories of my time in academia, both as a grad student and an adjunct. This one happened when I was an adjunct, and it's the time that a student tried to convert me to Christianity. Welcome back. Today, we are taking a break from Peterson. We'll be back to the book next week. But as I said in the intro, just a quick little story of something that happened to me when I was adjuncting. It's kind of weird and funny. And yeah, so before getting to the story, YouTube call to action. Like if you enjoy my stories. Comment if you were on the receiving end of something similar. If you were on the giving end of something like this. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories at some point. Let's see. There is also my Discord, Twitter, and Patreon. Links are in the description for those. And yeah, let's get to the story. This story took place my last year of adjuncting at the very end of the school year. Like, grades were already in. I was done teaching, done. But I was still doing the wrap-up stuff that you have to do, especially if you're leaving like I was. And I got an email from one of my students. And my sections were 150 students, maybe 170 depending on the room per section, and I had 2 sections. And unless you were one of the really aggravating students or one of the good students, I didn't know people's names. He was one of the not known name students. So I look him up. I see if he's emailed me before. He emailed me once with a question about something for one of the tests. Fine. He got an A- or an A in the class, so he's a reasonable student. All right, let's see what he wants to talk about. In the initial email, he said he wanted to talk about consciousness and some of the philosophy stuff that got brought up in class. Okay, we only talked philosophy in the beginning. I think the equivalent of some of the videos that I've got posted online. And consciousness. I'm intrigued. I am starting to suspect I know which way this conversation's going to go, but I have nothing better to do, so I agree to it. We go back and forth a little bit on the email, trying to set up when and where. He wants to have it at the coffee shop on campus. I don't. Because of what I'm suspecting this conversation is going to be, I'd like to have it in my office. Besides, I don't drink coffee, so it would just be me showing up with my water okay, hey, let's talk. Finally, I get him to agree to have it in my office because it's the most convenient and we won't be disturbed there, or it's not super busy with coffee people and everything else, so I convince him to come have it in my office. The meeting time rolls around, he shows up, sets his bag down, and pulls a bunch of stuff out, which is just never a good sign. So I can't get a read on what that huge stack of books was at that time, but he hands me a couple of the pamphlets, keeps one for himself, and I'm like, okay, yeah, he's gonna try and convert me, for sure. And as he's handing me this stuff, he says he would like to have some ground rules in place before we begin talking. Okay, I see you. This is why I want to have this conversation in my office. Because he's gonna come in and try to control the conversation, which I'm not going to abide by. So I'm like, okay, let's civilly find out what these ground rules are. And so he says that he wants us to maintain polite, civil conversation, no matter what comes up, and to make sure that, he gets his space to speak. And I say, sure, sounds good, as long as it's mutual. We both will respect or at least listen to what the other person is saying. He pauses for a sec because I'm already breaking the script that he had, but he agrees. So, one of those pamphlets, of which he has a copy, he's like, okay, so I'd like us to read through this together. If you would, take the first passage, please. And I'm like, hold up. No. Hold on. I tell him, look, I want to have a conversation. I don't want to do this reading exercise. We can both read. It's fine. And I tell him my current belief system is not from a lack of being exposed to Christian stuff. I was raised Lutheran. My dad was Catholic. I was sort of raised in this, and my current belief status isn't because I didn't hear the right stories when I was a kid. Like, I have my reasons for thinking the way I do, and if you'd like to talk about them, I'm more than happy to, but hearing about Jesus and the amazing things he did isn't going to change my mind. I emphasize this point because it seems like a recurring theme in chick tracts is that the person who gets saved by the end of the comic gets saved because, oh my gosh, I've never heard of Jesus Christ. Who's that? He did what? Oh my god, that's so amazing. Tell me more. Like, no. I mean, maybe some people aren't Christian because they haven't heard the good word, but a lot of the people, especially in the US and other English-speaking countries, just through cultural osmosis, they know a fair bit about Jesus and Christianity. Like, exposure isn't the issue here. So I think this deviation from me following his orders kind of threw him off his script, and it really felt like he was working from a script because he didn't really adapt too well. He didn't read the pamphlet at me, so points to him for that, but he did still kind of follow the points there. And so he asked me if I thought I was a sinner. And I said, I think I'm a good person. I try to do good things, and I'm not perfect, so sometimes I mess up. So we go back and forth a little bit about, am I a sinner? I think I'm a good person and generally try to do good things, but I'm not perfect. Asking for, have I lied, cheated, steal, whatever, aha, you're a sinner, sinners go to hell. The only way to avoid that is to take Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, I'm willing to grant you that a guy named Jesus probably existed in that time period. There probably were a couple of them. And I'll even say, like, sure, this one guy led a religious group. I'll even say he got crucified. Sure. But the accounts that are in the Bible are only in the Bible. And I would want proof or stories, records, evidence, something from somebody who was there and not part of, the sect at the time. I think me saying that, sure, there probably was a Jesus, bolstered his confidence because he's sort of like, aha, I've got her. Now I'll win this conversation for sure. Because he started in with like, okay, so you believe in Jesus Christ? And it's like, no, I don't believe in Jesus Christ. Like, as I said, he probably existed, but I don't think he did any of the miraculous things he did. And so he comes at me with, oh, but we have proof. I'm like, really? What is this proof? And so he tells me, like, it's all written in the Bible, and, we have these accounts, and there's the 4 main gospels, and they verify each other, and I'm like, hold up, dude. No, hold on. When I'm saying evidence, I would like independent evidence, like the Romans. And also, the gospels were written long after his death. Like, they were not primary sources historically. They were secondary. They weren't there. They were relying on what other people were telling them. And the fact that they corroborate each other, if they were written completely independently with no editing and no crosstalk, that would be amazing. But that's not how they were written. They corroborate each other because they kind of were working off each other's stories. Like, come on, dude. And also, that there was a gap there between Jesus dying and the stories being written. I guess they didn't cover that in whatever education he had. So that was interesting, and he said he would check on that and look into it. Not sure if he did or not. We go back and forth some, and our conversation ends up being centered on basically the issue of evidence. Him saying there was evidence, me saying there wasn't, or at least independent evidence. And he tried to use the Old Testament as proof, which I didn't let him, or at least not with me, where he said that, there's prophecies about the Messiah and all these things, and he'd have these features like be the heir to whoever and, the stuff. And I reminded him that the people who wrote the New Testament had access to the Old Testament, so they could change the story to fit whatever the predictions were, and he was just like, how can you say they would do that? Like, because I can, because they probably did. It's the most parsimonious explanation for everything. Like, come on, dude. So with this centering around evidence, he finally gets to a point where he asks me, what evidence would be enough for me? Like, what would I see or hear or experience that could make me a believer? And I have to think about it, because I hadn't. And I finally tell him that, God coming down from on high, curing everybody's illness. No more poverty, no more war, no more strife. Just everything is fixed and perfect and everybody's happy. And there is a God doing shit, like, visibly, like, I don't even know what that would be like, but a tangible God doing things. I would probably be able to reconsider my beliefs at that point. And so he said, yeah, but at that point it would be too late. So on the one hand, like, oh, he's worried about my soul. How sweet. On the other hand, this was an interesting experience, and I'm glad I had it, because this was the first time I'd really talked with somebody who was, like, firmly, like, diametrically opposed to my beliefs. I mean, growing up in the States, especially as somebody in their mid-30s, when I was younger, atheists weren't as open about being atheists, and they weren't as visible, and so it seems like most of my life I was surrounded by people who were of belief status of some form. I mean, I myself was one until grad school, so yeah. But it was never to this point of hellfire and damnation and a responsibility to go out and save people from themselves. Like, interacting with somebody who had that viewpoint was eye-opening. So we back and forth some more, and my phone starts ringing, which is weird because nobody ever calls an adjunct. There were 4 or 5 of us sharing the office at the time, and so you never knew who was going to be in when you tried calling. So all of us told our students, if you want to get a hold of us, email. That's the best way. So who would be calling me? It wasn't my husband. He would just use my cell phone, not the office phone. So I ignore it. Assume it's for, like, the one adjunct who actually did use the phone, and let it go to voicemail. We're still talking. It rings again. I ignore it. It rings again. The student is like, should you answer that? I'm like, I guess. Maybe it'll stop ringing. Pick it up. And the phone lines at the school weren't the best, so I don't hear anything. Hang up. It stops ringing. Back and forth some more. And at some point, one of the faculty members peeks her head in, like, hey, you doing okay? I'm like, oh, hey, yeah, no, I'm fine. We're just talking. It's good. It's fine. She's like, okay. Like, okay. That's weird. But more on that in a sec. That was one of the faculty members who was nice to me, for the record. Back and forth, back and forth. We finally settle on, like, okay, here's my reading list to suggest to him for things that might open his mind a little bit. Talk about consciousness, talk about how the brain works, talk about that stuff. And I tell him, like, I'll send him the stuff in an email. And he tells me that he'll send me some materials through email as well that might make me change my position. Okay. Never heard from him again. Even when I sent him, like, a couple book suggestions, YouTube videos, things, never heard back, so that's fine. He takes his pamphlets back. Well, he gets his pamphlets handed back to him, because, look, I'm not going to read them. Recycle, here you go. And he leaves. After he leaves, I go down the hall to that faculty member, like, hey, what's up? And she's like, I thought you needed saving. What? We get those students all the time. Like, me and this other faculty member have a system set up where if we get sort of held hostage by a student, we'll call the other one to give them an out. I was like, no, it was fine. I kind of expected this is where the conversation would go, and it was interesting. I'd never had one like that before, but thank you for trying to save me. And it's kind of funny. They were both trying to save me in their own way. But yeah. So that was the time a student tried unsuccessfully to convert me to not even sure what form of Christianity. Might have been Mormon, might have been evangelical. I don't know. Didn't read the pamphlet that closely, I guess. So yeah, that was my story. If you enjoyed it, like I said earlier, like, comment, subscribe, blah blah blah. Next week we'll be back to the Peterson, and yeah, see you later.